darkmyths.org and Neapolis Media Group proudly present to you the Lone Gunman Podcast, featuring your host, Rob Clark, where research comes to shine and myths come to die. Stay tuned. Be right there.
Well, hello, ho, ho, ho. What's up, everybody? This is your boy, Rob Clark. This is episode 178 of the Lone Gunman Podcast. And if I sound a little different, I got a new microphone for Christmas. So, let me know how this one sounds. It better sound damn good for what it costs. So, thank you to my lovely wife for that. Happy holidays, everyone. I have a bit of a holiday potpourri show for you today. It's got a little bit of everything. We're going to be talking about some Cubans. We're going to be talking about Eugene Davis, Jack Martin. A little bit of everything. I got a little bit of everything for you today. So I wanted to hit you up first. Give you one last show for 2020. 2020 has been a shitty year, not only for me, but I'm sure for most of you as well, whether it regards your health or your job or anything else. Your boy did have the COVID back in November, but I am back 100%, and hopefully y'all are staying healthy and not getting affected too badly by this crazy stuff. So let's jump right into it, shall we? I was actually going to do a little bit of this show back in August, and until my buddy Doug, who I do Quick Hits, a JFK News and Notes podcast with, let me know what he was going to do his presentation on at Lancer this year. So I decided at that time it would probably not behoove either one of us to do that show. I didn't want to preempt him or think that I didn't want to have him think that I was trying to cut in line on him or anything. It's one of those coincidence type things. I had the paperwork, I had found this stuff, planning on doing a show on it. And, come to find out that's what he was doing his Lancer presentation on. So I've been sitting on this for a while. I let him know about it. And, he told me to just go ahead and put out what I got, So I will. So if you haven't had a chance to check out Doug's Lancer presentation, this is going to be a little bit about what he talked about. And I'm probably not going to go in depth too terribly much on it, because it's kind of one of those dead-end brick wall type situations where you can only take it so far, because the investigators only took it so far. So, on December the 5th, 1963, a letter was found. I'm sorry. This is the report, December 5th, 1963. The actual letter was found on November 28th at the post office in Dallas, Texas, addressed to Lee Harvey Oswald. No, I'm sorry. Let me try that again. It was postmarked on the 28th, and the letter was received from Thomas Kelly, Inspector of the U.S. Secret Service, on December the 5th by Special Agent Robert Lish. Sorry about the confusion of the dates. The actual letter was dated November 10th, 1963, which is, of course, before the assassination. But the actual letter wasn't sent until the 28th of November. and they didn't come across it until the 5th. So this letter was sent from Havana, Cuba, and it was addressed to Lee Harvey Oswald in care of the mail office of Dallas, Texas, U.S. of A. Says, "Dear friend Lee, one more time I write you since the last time that we saw each other in Miami. The Spanish books that you took from the hotel and I have hardly anything. I told you of the man who was thinking of visiting here shortly, and you ought to close the business as soon as possible. Like I told you before in Miami, I recommend much prudence, and do not be foolish with the money I gave you." I should also add that this is a translation. The original letters were sent in Spanish. "So I hope you will not defraud me, and that our dreams will be realized. After the affair, I am going to recommend much to the chief." The chief. "That he certainly will have much interest in knowing you, as they need men like you. I told him you could put a candle out at 50 meters, and he did not want to believe me. But I made him believe it, because I saw you with my own eyes, and the chief was astonished. Good Lee, practice your Spanish for when you come to Havana, for Havana is the land of the free, of the beautiful women, and the rich Havana tobacco. Don't forget to do all I told you to the very letter, and leave nothing that could lead to your trail, and when you receive my letters, destroy them as always. After the affair, I will send you the money, and we will see each other in Miami, where always. Sincerely always, Pedro Charles." So these are the infamous Pedro Charles letters we're going to be talking about here today. And there is a number of these letters. They were sent to the program directors of the Voice of the United States of America in Washington, D.C. They were sent to Senator Robert Kennedy, or Attorney General Robert Kennedy. They were sent to the director of the Diario of New York. And Pedro Charles is not the only person sending these letters. So let's have a hang at some of these other ones here. This one was sent on December 3rd, 1963, from Havana to the Voice of America, the Voice of the United States of America, Washington, D.C. It says, "Gentlemen," and of course this was translated from Spanish as well, so if it sounds janky, that's why. It says, "We are hereby writing you to let you know that the assassination of the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, is connected with the revolutionary government of Cuba. Approximately 2 months ago, the alleged assassin of the President, Lee Harvey Oswald, had an interview in Miami with Mr. Pedro Charles, an agent of Fidel Castro, in Mexico, who had for delivery to Lee Harvey Oswald the amount of $7,000. The source is official, from a from a lady who used to accompany Pedro Charles to a nightclub in Miami, and who saw them conferring together several times. This lady could not help but recognize him from photographs published here in Havana. This lady resides in Havana, but her name cannot be disclosed since her escort, Mr. Pedro Charles, is at the present time in Mexico on a mission for the Castro government for a cultural exchange. This lady, as soon as she is able to leave the country, since she is suffering from a serious nervous breakdown, will move to a Central American country secretly, in order to avoid being detained by the Castro police. This is all the information I can provide for the time being, and it is the genuine truth. Let us hope that the lady in question may be able to leave Cuba so that we can find out from her own lips all the information that has a bearing on this monstrous event in which President Kennedy lost his life. Sincerely yours, Miguel Galban Lopez." So we have Pedro Charles and Miguel Galban Lopez. Now, this is another letter dated November 27th, postmarked December 3rd. Same as the last one, translated from Spanish. This one was sent to the Diario of New York, whatever that is. Dear Sir, it is my pleasure to write this letter to inform you that the assassination of President Kennedy was paid for by Mr. Pedro Charles, who is Fidel Castro's agent in Mexico. This man became a close friend of former Marine and expert shooter Lee H. Oswald in Mexico. They were seen together frequenting various nightclubs. The above-mentioned Mr. Pedro Charles had to deliver to Oswald $7,000 as a down payment. Later, he was to deliver $10,000 upon completion of the work. In other words, the crime was agreed upon for $17,000. Mr. Pedro Charles, who uses other fictitious names and a diplomatic passport to enter and leave Mexico and the United States, is at present in the residence of the Cuban ambassador in Mexico, according to the latest information in my possession. I want you to know before anybody else the truth about the Dallas assassination of President Kennedy. Signed, Miguel Gilberto Lopez, ex-captain of the rebel army and Cuban exile. So he signed that one a little different and had a little bit different information in that letter. This is definitely not what the FBI wanted to hear. They were trying not to have Oswald connected to Russia or Cuba or anybody else like that, because it would mean war. They would have to do something about it. Much easier if he is the lone assassin, if you know what I'm saying. They did take the letters very seriously, though, although they did not disclose any of the stuff to the public at the time. On December the 12th, Hoover himself sent out a memo to the director of the Bureau of Intelligence and Research Department of the state concerning Lee Harvey Oswald, stating, on December the 5th, our Dallas, Texas office learned that the Secret Service had intercepted a letter postmarked the 28th of November, 1963, from Havana, Cuba, addressed to Oswald, care of the mail office in Dallas. This letter, which was dated November 10th, was signed by Pedro Charles and was written in such a manner as to indicate that Oswald had been paid by Charles to carry out an unidentified mission which involved accurate shooting. This bureau is also in receipt of a letter postmarked November 28th from Havana addressed to Mr. Robert Kennedy, Secretary of Justice, Washington, D.C., and written by one Mario del Rosario Molina of Havana. So we have Pedro Charles, Miguel Gilberto Lopez, and now Mario del Rosario Molina of Havana. I wonder this is why they were leaning on old Joe Molina at the school book depository so heavy, because of the last name match. Says this letter was dated November 27th and alleged that Lee Harvey Oswald assassinated President Kennedy at the direction of Pedro Charles, a Cuban agent who has traveled in the United States under various aliases. And according to the writer, Oswald met with Charles in Miami, Florida several months ago and was paid $7,000 up front by Charles. An examination of both of the above described letters has shown that they were prepared on the same typewriter. In addition, both envelopes appear to have come from the same batch. Both postmarks contain similar irregularities, and the same type of pen and ink was used to sign both letters. Inquiries by our Miami office have failed to develop any information concerning either Pedro Charles or Mario del Rosario Molina. Now, I should also add that the Miguel Gilberto Lopez letters also match typewriter style envelope and pen and ink signatures as the rest of them. So somebody in Havana, Cuba is sending these letters to the United States using several fictitious names and stating very specific information. So, on January 17th, 1964, Hoover sends a letter to the Honorable J. Lee Rankin of the President's Commission. Okay? It says, Dear Mr. Rankin, reference is made to my letter dated December 13th, 1963, enclosing a summary of the results of the investigations of several hoaxes, and false reports which had arisen in connection with the Oswald case. The following information supplements the data previously furnished to you in this regard. So, as of December 13th, this is a week after the FBI report on the letters, Hoover has determined them to be hoaxes and false reports. And he's letting Rankin know this. The FBI has furnished 4 letters written from Cuba indicating or alleging that the assassination of President Kennedy was undertaken by Oswald under the direction of a Cuban agent, one Pedro Charles, who reportedly gave Oswald $7,000 for the mission. Specifically, these letters are as follows. A letter dated November 10th, but postmarked November 28th, from Havana, Cuba, signed by Pedro Charles. This letter was intercepted by the Secret Service and referred to the FBI. A letter addressed to the Attorney General, postmarked November 28, 1963, from Havana, and signed by Mario del Rosario Molina. This letter was referred to the FBI by the Department of Justice. A letter postmarked December 3rd, 63, from Havana, to the Voice of America, signed by Gilberto Lopez. This communication was referred to us by the United States Information Agency. And number 4, a letter postmarked December 3rd from Havana, signed by Miguel Gabon Lopez and addressed to the editor of the Diario of New York, a Spanish-language newspaper published in New York City. This letter was forwarded to the FBI by an official from the newspaper. 1 copy each of the above-described letters is enclosed herewith, translated from Spanish. As noted above, the first letter received was purportedly written by Pedro Charles, was dated some 2 weeks prior to the assassination, and was designed to give the impression Charles was furnishing instructions to Oswald relative to the assassination. The other 3 letters purport to be from individuals who have knowledge that Charles conspired with Oswald to kill the president. However, examinations by the FBI laboratory have shown that all these communications were actually prepared on the same typewriter, and that several of the envelopes used came from the same batch. It is therefore clear that this represents some type of hoax, possibly on the part of some anti-Castro group seeking to discredit the Cuban government. Sincerely yours, J. Edgar Hoover. And here's the letter that was sent to President Kennedy from Mario del Rosario Molina. We haven't read this one yet. This one says, Dear Mr. Kennedy, this letter is to advise you that former Marine Lee Harvey Oswald was the man who assassinated your brother by the express order of a gentleman named Pedro Charles, residing in Miami, Florida. This gentleman had an interview with him in a Miami nightclub about 2 months ago. This Mr. Pedro Charles is an agent of Fidel Castro in the United States and uses other names. Young Lee Harvey Oswald received an advance payment of $5,000, which he spent in various nightclubs, after which Pedro Charles advanced him another $2,000. The understanding was for Lee Harvey Oswald to go first to Houston and then to Dallas, where President JFK was scheduled to pay a visit. In fact, information was available at the Chamber of Commerce of Dallas that the president would visit Texas. Pedro Charles reached an understanding with Lee Harvey Oswald, an expert marksman, for the president to be killed and for an international scandal to be unleashed, so that all the blame would fall on the racists and the extreme rightists of the state of Texas. This is the truth about the assassination of President Kennedy. I was acquainted with these details, but I never gave them any credence. I learned of them through the words of a lady who lives with Pedro Charles, who is the man who uses several false names and passports to enter and leave the United States, Mexico, and Cuba. The lady in question, whose name I cannot disclose, lives here in Havana and is very much affected by the lamentable happenings. She never thought of what might happen because they were in the habit of kidding about everything, but this joke was reality. If the accused Lee Harvey Oswald had not been assassinated at the hands of a gambler, there is no doubt that the accused would have told the whole truth as time went on, because the first thing that Pedro Charles told Oswald was for him to be wide awake in doing the job and, if possible, to erase all clues and not get caught. In addition, he was not to carry anything compromising in his pockets, anything that might prevent him from achieving the objective of his mission. We sincerely regret the loss of President Kennedy. He was a man of peace, and I, myself, feel mortified and ashamed of being a communist and of knowing a little about this matter from my conversation with this lady who knew all the details, but was not brave enough to report this monstrous crime. Right now, as I am writing this report, I am preparing any effects in order to embark for Venezuela clandestinely. In fact, if the political science of Castro, or political police of Castro, should arrest me, I would face the firing squad. Someday, the lady in question will make a very interesting statement about this case as soon as she recuperates from her nervous state and is able to point out the mastermind behind the assassination of the President Kennedy, who is none other than Pedro Charles, agent of the State Security Department of Cuba and a fanatic of Fidel Castro. Sincerely yours, Mario del Rosario Molina, Havana, Cuba. So yeah, that's a very interesting letter. Again, very similar to the other ones, but a lot more information. It was addressed to Mr. Roberto Kennedy. Roberto. Now, on the 12th of December, one day before sending his letter to J. Lee Rankin, Hoover sent a memo to his husband, Clyde Tolson. He said, Rankin called from New York to check in with me on the matter of the commission. He wanted to work out an arrangement with me which he thought might be satisfactory. He said he understood Mr. Belmont handled the investigation. I told Mr. Rankin that Belmont, Rosen, and I handled the preparation of the report and will handle additional leads as they come in. Mr. Rankin asked how he should handle anything that comes up, things the commission will want developed further in regard to the FBI, whether they should be handled directly with me or somebody I would designate. I replied that I will designate someone. I explained that I sent Mr. Malley down to Dallas to handle all of our angles there, that he was on the ground there, and that I think he probably would be the man who would be more familiar with things Mr. Rankin should further explore. I stated Mr. Malley is in Dallas at the present time, but will be ordered back tomorrow, that he will be available, and that we will be glad to run out any additional men as he may want. Mr. Rankin, of the difficulty about the department's desire to issue certain conclusions, that they wanted to issue a statement before the report went to the commission with the conclusion that Oswald was the assassin and that no foreign or submersive elements were involved, and that Rubinstein and Oswald had no connection. That I flatly disagreed. They took it up with the White House and the President and agreed with me that we should reach no conclusion. Nevertheless, the report does reach two conclusions in substance. I said I personally believe that Oswald was the assassin, that the second aspect as to whether he was the only man gives me great concern, that we have several letters, not in the report because we were not able to prove it, written to him from Cuba, referring to the job he was going to do, his good marksmanship, and stating when it was all over he would be brought back to Cuba and presented to the chief. But we do not know if the chief was Castro, and cannot make an investigation because we have no intelligence operation in Cuba. That I did not put this into the report because we did not have proof of it, and didn't want to put speculation in the report. That was the reason I urged strongly that we not reach conclusion that Oswald was the only man. As to Rubinstein, I said I did not want a statement about Ruby and Oswald, that we have no proof they were ever together. I stated Rubinstein is a shady character from the hoodlum element of Chicago, has a poor background, runs a nightclub in Dallas, and is what will be called a police buff. That the police officers in the precinct have been able to get food and liquor from him anytime they drop in. That while I think there was no connection between him and Oswald, I did not want the report to be 100% sure on that. Fourth, I stated that I did not believe any conclusions concerning Rubinstein should be reached at this time because he has not been tried. That was why I suggested to the Attorney General of Texas, and understand the Chief Justice did too, that his court of special inquiry be held in abeyance until after the commission makes its findings. I said I thought they would go ahead with the Rubenstein trial in February. That was why I felt our report should name merely the facts we have established. I further stated that there may be some aspects Mr. Rankin will want to have to run out further. That we have letters from people who claim to have seen Oswald, that up to the time we submitted the report we had cleared up all these angles except the Cuban thing, which I discussed generally and explained that the informer recanted and blew that angle out of the window. That sort of thing may be popping up all the time, and I advised Mr. Rankin that if he wanted any leads followed out or any implementation of what we have already done, we will give him 100% cooperation. Mr. Rankin stated he knew he would, that he just wanted to establish it as a matter I should know. I told him not to hesitate to call me, blah, 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 blah. I mentioned to him the actions of the Soviet Embassy, the Communist Party in New York, and John Apt is making available to us their information on Oswald. I also discussed the operations of the Dallas Police Department in the case which led to the murder of Oswald. In connection with stories indicating that Oswald could not have done this alone, I stated he was a marksman and it wasn't anything he could not do, that we have tested it on our rifle range and were able to get off shots even faster than he did, that there is no question in my mind about it, that we also found the fingerprints and the bullets so conclusively fired from the gun, that we have all this and we have all the photographs. Mr. Rankin inquired if we also have the television film runoff of the shooting of Oswald, and I told him we do. Mr. Rankin said Mr. Malone delivered him the copy of the report and also offered to help in any way possible. This was very kind of Malone, but he will not deal with Malone in anything unless it is some emergency, and he has to handle it locally. I told Mr. Rankin this was all right, and if he needed to call upon Malone, he would be available. I told Mr. Rankin to let us know if there is anything that we can do to assist his commission. Very truly yours, Clyde. Very truly yours, and sincerely yours, J. Edgar Hoover. So, there's a little subterfuge going on concerning the investigation of these letters to the commission, and some conclusions being handed to Rankin from Hoover. Alright, so next up we have another Cuban. And this guy recently received some shine in the tabloids last year. And this is from a memo. This looks like a CIA report. From March 20th, 1964. In the above memorandum, I mentioned several times warranting additional FBI action. Some of these have also since been reported on by that agency. On April the 29th, 1964, I spoke to Mr. Sam Popich of the FBI in the presence of Mr. Birch D. O'Neill. I asked Mr. Popich for further details with respect to photographs 2, 3, 4, 5, and 11 of reference to memorandum. These pertain to the mysterious letters to which Lee Harvey Oswald and Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, which appear to be provocations, the extent of Oswald's photographic talents prior to the employment at Jaggers Child's Stovall, where he indicated knowledge of microdotting, the mission of Gilberto Lopez, who entered Mexico on November the 23rd, 1963, and 4 days later proceeded to Cuba by plane under unusual circumstances. The phony draft cards in Oswald's possession, and allegations that Jack Ruby had an interest in Florida and Havana gambling houses in the early 50s and was active in arranging illegal flights from Miami to the Castro organization in Cuba during that period. Ruby was allegedly a part owner of 2 planes. Mr. Popich said that this charge regarding Ruby sounded like a lot of nonsense, that the FBI had received many allegations of this sort regarding Ruby, which have proved to be without foundation. I replied that since the FBI used an informant symbol for this information, we have no way of determining the veracity of the source. Mr. Poppich said he would contact the special agents handling the case to obtain answers to all the questions raised by me. I told him that we would be interested in receiving any ID cards, etc., of Russian origin possessed by Oswald, which could be used for future documentation purposes by our laboratory specialists. Mr. Poppich expressed doubt that such materials would be released until after the Commission files their final report. However, he will alert his colleagues to our interest in this matter. Sincerely, Arthur Dooley of the CIA. So the CIA was interested in some of Oswald's Russian identification cards, likely so that they could reproduce them. But it also mentioned a fellow by the name of Gilberto Lopez, who departed the United States on November 23rd, 1963. So why is that important? Well, let's take a deeper look here at Mr. Gilberto Lopez. This comes from the Secret Service. It is a report to the Intelligence Committee, June 9th, 1976. While reviewing the SSC's draft report on the performance of intelligence agencies regarding the assassination of President Kennedy, SSC staff members directed my attention to 5 pages dealing with a Cuban American whose activities immediately prior to and following the assassination were incredibly suspicious. The individual was investigated by the FBI in a manner described by the SSC as inadequate. Since his identity is not revealed in the draft report and he may be an appropriate subject of the protective interest, the SSC has advised me of these identifying particulars. The man's name is Gilberto Lopez. Date of birth, January 23, 1940. Place of birth, Havana, Cuba. Citizenship, claims U.S. citizenship through mother's citizenship. Summary of events. So, folks, on November the 20th, 1963, Lopez was in Tampa, Florida, seeking an entry permit to Mexico. President Kennedy was in Tampa on or about that date. On November the 23rd, 1963, the day after the assassination, Lopez entered Mexico from the U.S., in parentheses, from Texas. Although the Mexican government had closed the border, he somehow managed to slip through. Likely due to his Cuban citizenship. On November the 27th, Lopez departed Mexico for Havana, Cuba. Lopez is alleged to have resided in Cuba since that time. The SSC staff reports that it had earlier asked the Secret Service if this individual was listed of protective interest, and the service had replied in the negative. I believe it is advisable to check again the Secret Service indices regarding this individual and to request from any CIA, FBI, or other agencies the information, if any, they may have regarding this Gilberto Lopez. The pertinent section of the SSC's draft report can be made available for Secret Service inspection prior to the official release during the week of June 21st. If this is desired, please advise me. I would appreciate being kept advised of the results of further inquiries concerning Lopez. And this has sensitive and top secret stamped all over it, folks. All over it. Littered. So on June 15th, 1976, we have referencing the memorandum from J. Robert McBrien, the Special Assistant for Special Legislation and Projects. The following notes were abstracted from pages 117 through 1117 of the SSC draft report. So this is what the 5 pages that was referenced in the letter I just read you is concerning. It concerned the man, and it needed to be followed up. So the information that they had is this. On December the 1st, information received from CIA indicated that Cubana airline flight from Mexico City to Cuba was delayed from 5 to 10 p.m., awaiting an unidentified passenger. Other CIA information that Cuban diplomatic personnel in Mexico City were at the airport at about this time on November 22nd, 1963. Unidentified individual arrived at 9:30 p.m., boarded a Cubana flight without passing through customs, and traveled in the cockpit with the pilots to Cuba and did not mingle with passengers. When queried by SSC in January of 76, the CIA indicated that it had no info on any follow-up regarding the above information. In the section perused, Gilberto Lopez is referred to as the Cuban American. Cuban American information originated from CIA to FBI, who did a follow-up of sorts, in quotes. One CIA source alleged that the Cuban American was, quote, involved in the assassination. Follow-up was not part of the FBI work for the Warren Commission. CIA info states the Cuban American passed from Texas to Mexico on 11/23/63. Immediately after the assassination of JFK, the border had been closed by Mexico, and it was reopened on 11/23/63. CIA knew this. Cuban American arrived in Mexico City on November 25th, 1963, and on November 27th, the Cuban American departed on Cubana flight to Havana. He had Cuban courtesy visa and an expired U.S. passport. He was the only passenger aboard the flight with a crew of 9. March of 64, CIA reported a source alleged the Cuban American received a permit to enter Mexico on November 18th while he was in Tampa. Same source said the Cuban American was involved in the assassination. No follow-up indicated by CIA except to ask state. FBI investigation of the Cuban American after his unusual travel terminated with Warren Commission report, and Cuban American was in Cuba outside the FBI jurisdiction. Following taken by SSC from FBI reports on the Cuban American, he applied for a U.S. passport at U.S. Consul Office in Havana in June of 1960. Stated mother was American citizen, although moved with parents to Cuba when very young. She married a Cuban national. Cuban American was born in 1940. In July of 60, the Cuban American obtained this U.S. passport, valid through January of 63, asked Cuban permission to return to Cuba in May of 62. Cuban American's cousins said Cuban American traveled there after May 62. August of 62, Cuban American married an American woman and lived in Key West until June of 63, and then moved to Tampa. In August of 63, wife moved back to Key West, marital problems. Cuban American characterized as pro-Castro. Cuban American told sources that he left Cuba to avoid military service, but he registered with the U.S. draft on July 29, 1960 at Key West shortly after arriving. February of 62, he was classified as 4F, language barrier, doctor's certificate that he had grand mal epilepsy. Same FBI sources said Cuban American returned to Cuba in 1963 because he feared the draft. Some say health problems, others because of worry for parents. FBI source said Cuban American's brother in the Cuban military and studied in the Soviet Union. November 17, 63, Cuban American, at home of member of the Tampa chapter of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Some talk of waiting for important call from Cuba getting go-ahead order, which would enable him to leave the U.S. Statement that Cuban American was refused travel back to Cuba. JFK had several public appearances in Tampa on November 18, 63. On November 20th, 63, Mexican tourist card issued to Cuban American by honorary consul in Tampa. November 23rd, 63, he entered Mexico at Nuevo Laredo, not listed as driver when cross-border, Possible conclusion, he was a passenger. December 63, monthly meeting of Tampa Fair Play for Cuba Committee. A woman said, called Cuban at 5 a.m., learned that Cuban American arrived safely via Texas and Mexico. January of 64, same woman reportedly said that Cuban American borrowed $190 before he left for Mexico. September of 64, FBI source said acquainted with Cuban American and said he borrowed $150 but repaid only $25. September of 64, another FBI source said that as of then, Cuban American not working in Cuba but passing time playing dominoes. So that's a little bit on Gilberto Lopez. Now, a little bit more on Gilberto Lopez. There's a lot of different sources. So, this is another CIA document. Stamped sensitive, top secret, all over it. States, headquarters has received report that on day of assassination, Cubana aircraft delayed its departure from Mexico City for 5 hours, awaiting important passenger who arrived at Mexico City Airport in private twin-motor aircraft at 21:30 hours Mexican time. Passenger transferred directly to Cubana plane without going through customs or immigration. Traveled in pilot's cabin to Havana above from that's a weird Comulster diplomat who passenger on same plane to Havana. Request you attempt, identify, and determine reason unusual actions at the airport. And this is to Mexico City Wave from the director of the CIA. And CCing Desmond Fitzgerald and J.C. King. Another CIA memo from Monterrey, Mexico Wave. Enrique Ruiz Montalvo, agent of the Federal Judicial Police, informed Base that one of his contacts reported in late February that Gilberto Lopez, a U.S. citizen, was involved in Kennedy assassination. According to this contact, Lopez entered Mexico on foot from Laredo, Texas, about 1,200 hours on the 23rd of November, carrying U.S. passport number whatever, and proceeded by bus to Mexico, where he entered Cuban embassy. On 27 November, he left embassy for Cuba on Cubana Flight 465 and was the only passenger allowed on the plane. Lopez was issued Mexican Travel Form 3, number blah 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 at Nuevo Laredo. Ruiz said he could not verify this info, but believed it might be of interest to the U.S. government. Base and OD acid files contain no identifiable traces on Lopez. Please advise results, headquarters, passport check, including biodata on Lopez if possible for further checking by base and station. Background info, RA base contact with Ruiz contained in HMY 2120 dated March 18th being pouched on March 20th. Another classified message, secret, sensitive, stamped all over it. So yeah, very interesting stuff here concerning Gilberto Lopez, if true. Of course, the HSCA looked into some things, and in the Lopez report, from the draft of the Lopez report, there's a section called the Cuban American, where they take another look at this Gilberto Lopez and try to figure out anything else. Of course, it mentions a chronology of activities of the FBI and the CIA on this lead. The CIA investigation appeared to start on December 3rd, 1963. when Mexico City Station sent a classified message to headquarters that a source identified as L.I. Tempo had requested of the Mexico City chief of station at 1300 hours on that date urgent traces on U.S. citizen Gilberto Lopez. The source said Lopez arrived in Mexico on November 23rd en route to Havana and that Lopez had disappeared with no record of his trip. According to the message, Lopez had a tourist card carrying number 24553, which he obtained in Tampa on November 20th, 63, and his passport number was 310162. The message stated that Lopez left Mexico for Havana on November 27th via Cubana Airlines. The classified message listed the cryptonym L.I. Fire as the original source of information on Lopez's travel. It indicated the Mexico City station had no traces on him. In another classified message dated December 3rd, 63, from the Mexico City station to CIA headquarters, the station reported also that the FBI office in Mexico City had been advised by Mexican authorities that Lopez entered Mexico on November 27th at Nuevo Laredo. In another classified message dated December 4th to the Mexico City station from headquarters, the agency reported that the State Department check on Lopez had produced nothing yet because of the difficulty in tracing records using only a name and passport number. The message contained this paragraph. It says, "We assume you have not told L.I. Tempo that Lopez flew to Cuba on November 27th because you do not want to blow the L.I. Fire operation. This problem is up to you." The L.I. Fire operation referred to in the classified message to the Mexico City station involved cooperation between the CIA and Mexican federal officials who participated in a plan of photographing passengers of flights departing for Havana and obtaining the passenger lists of the Cubana flights. Mexican officials also had their own program to photograph the passports of the passengers arriving from Havana. On December the 5th, 1963, the Mexico City station reported that the L.I. Tempo source had stated that Gilberto Lopez had crossed the Mexican border at Laredo, Texas on November 23rd and registered in the Roosevelt Hotel in Mexico City on November 25th and stayed in room 203. L.I. Tempo also reported that Lopez departed on a Cubana flight on November 27th for Havana, and that classified message stated additionally that L.I. Tempo had several good photographs of Gilberto Lopez. The photograph of Lopez contained in his CIA 201 file has 27 November 63 stamped on the back. In the photograph, Lopez is shown wearing dark sunglasses, and the background in the photograph is dark and indistinguishable. A dispatch the following day from the chief of station in Mexico City to headquarters, copies of the photograph of Lopez were attached, and the dispatch stated when the photograph was taken on the night of November 27th, as he was boarding a Cubana flight. "I wear my sunglasses at night while boarding a Cubana flight." The dispatch gave previously reported information of the numbers of Lopez's passport and tourist card and his entry into and departure from Mexico. The dispatch contained the additional information that Lopez was listed as the only passenger on Cubana Flight 465, and that the flight contained a crew of 9 Cubans. It said he used a U.S. passport and a Cuban courtesy visa. The dispatch had the following message. Source states the timing and circumstances surrounding subject's travel through Mexico and departure for Havana are highly suspicious. The dispatch said also that the source urgently requested all available data on the individual. Also on December 5th, the Mexico City station and identified this Cuban American as Gilberto Policarpo Lopez. It also stated that Lopez was not identical with a Gilberto Lopez who had been identified as active in pro-Castro groups in Los Angeles. On March 19, 1964, CIA headquarters sent a classified message to headquarters that Enrique Ruiz Montalvo, an agent of the Mexican Federal Judicial Police, had stated that one of Ruiz's contacts reported in late February '64 that an American citizen named Gilberto Lopez was involved in the Kennedy assassination. So we've gone over that. The report also stated that Lopez's cousin, Guillermo Serpa Rodriguez, told the FBI that Lopez came to the United States for the first time sometime after Castro first came to power. He stayed approximately a year and then returned to Cuba. Rodriguez stated that Lopez returned to Cuba because he was homesick and missed his family. He had parents and 4 brothers who still resided in Cuba. Rodriguez stated also that Lopez's brother Celito was a member of the Cuban militia at the time. Another brother, Raimundo Policarpo Lopez, had reportedly been sent to the Soviet Union to study by the Cuban government. Rodriguez told the FBI that Lopez returned to the U.S. in '60 or '61 because he was afraid he would be drafted into the Cuban militia. The FBI learned that Lopez married an American woman in Key West in August of '62, and according to Lopez's wife, he worked for a time with the Pepsi Cola Company in '62 and at the Molina, there's that name again, at the Molina and Murgia Bakery in Key West, which was owned by cousins. She said that he also worked for a construction company in Tampa in June of '63. Sorry, damn pages are sticking out of here. Come on. Lopez's wife told the FBI that Lopez began suffering recurrent attacks of epilepsy or fits and had to be confined at Jackson State Hospital. Wait a minute. Jackson State Hospital in Key West in early '63. She stated that he was treated by doctors from Coral Gables and Key West for the epilepsy. She stated that she did not believe he had a history of epilepsy before coming to the United States. She believed his convulsions were brought on by nervous tension and worry over his family in Cuba, and may have been a reason for his return to Cuba in '63. The wife said that in approximately November of '63, she received a letter from Lopez saying he had returned to Cuba. The wife stated she was surprised he had returned to Cuba, but that he had mentioned he was going back and he left when he left Tampa in November of '63. The wife gave her opinion that he returned because of his close relationship with his parents. The wife stated she received another letter from him later from Cuba. According to the letter, he was working as an elevator operator in Havana. In that letter, Lopez said he received some kind of financial assistance for the trip from an organization in Tampa. According to the wife, Lopez did not have sufficient funds to pay the expenses to get to Mexico and Cuba. She said that he never had any contact with Cuban refugee organizations to her knowledge. Rodriguez told the FBI that Lopez left Key West to go to Tampa and return with the hope of being able to return to Cuba. That he was definitely pro-Castro, and recounted that in one instance he and Lopez actually had a fist fight over Lopez's pro-Castro sympathies. In a report from March '63, the FBI reported that Lopez had attended a meeting of the Tampa Fair Play for Cuba Committee on November 20th, '63. The report also stated that a meeting of the group on November 17th, Lopez stated that he had been refused travel back to Cuba. He said at that time he was waiting for a phone call from Cuba to get word on his departure to Cuba. According to that report from March '64, a member of the Tampa FPCC stated that she called a friend in Cuba on December 8th and was told that Lopez had arrived safely. The member had attempted to locate Lopez in Cuba through friends because Lopez had not delivered gifts to persons in Cuba from people in Florida as he promised to do. The member stated also that the Tampa chapter had given Lopez approximately $190 for the return trip to Cuba. The member said that Lopez had gone to Cuba via Mexico City because he did not have a passport. Well, he had one, but it was, out of date. As pointed out in the Senate report, this omission was made more egregious. Lopez's FBI file contains a memo from the Tampa office dated October 26, 1964, which states, "It is felt that information developed regarding the subject is not sufficient to merit consideration for the security index. The only information transmitted by the FBI to the Warren Commission on Gilberto Lopez concerned a check at the passport office. The information the Bureau did send to the Commission about the Tampa chapter did not include any information on Lopez's activities. The CIA apparently did not provide any information on Lopez to the Warren Commission from its contacts in Mexico City Station. As pointed out in the Senate report, this omission is made more egregious and incorrect on several points. Lopez's name was misspelled Lopez with an S instead of a Z. It stated that Lopez entered Mexico on foot when the CIA repeated the FBI's conclusion that he had traveled by auto. It gave incorrect digits in Lopez's passport number. It stated that the Mexican tourist visa was issued in Nuevo Laredo and not Tampa, and it reported that he stayed at the Cuban embassy and not the Roosevelt Hotel. Based on these inaccuracies, the Inspector General concluded that the source patently was extensively misinformed. Based on that observation, the Inspector General completely discounted the March cable by the Deputy Chief of Station in Mexico City on March 20 of 1964 that the Mexican police source information jibed with what had earlier been reported by the CIA source. In that regard, the 1977 Inspector General report explains that the agency had no other means of investigating Lopez at its disposal, and it carried the lead as far as it was able by questioning a Cuban defector about Lopez. While the fact of the CIA's lack of access to further information about Lopez may well be the case, that fact does not explain either the failure of the CIA to take more seriously the suspicions of the sources, or most importantly, to report whatever information it had to the Warren Commission. So, do you think the suspicious activity of Gilberto Lopez was warranted to be told to the Warren Commission? I think so. His timing, his background, his connections. Yeah, I would say so. Sounds very familiar to, Lee Oswald. Very interesting stuff there. So anyway, that's Gilberto Lopez. Was he involved in the assassination? It's hard to tell. It seems like he was following Kennedy from Tampa to Dallas and then departing to Mexico City to Cuba, which was originally, of course, Oswald's plan, allegedly. So, very interesting stuff there. All right, let's jump. Let's make a big jump. Back to New Orleans to Jack Martin. Now, he wrote a letter to Honorable Richard E. Roby on Monday the 25th, November 1963. And the Honorable Roby works at the Office of Compliance and Security of the Federal Aviation Agency of Washington, D.C. He says, "Dear Dick, the purpose of this letter is twofold. First off, I need a small favor, and secondly, I have some information for you which may bring to light some very important facts concerning a connection between Oswald, the subject who assassinated President Kennedy, and Captain David W. Ferry. First, there is a crackpot employed at the same place my wife is, who is a relief telephone operator whose name is blah blah blah. This person lords it over the other employees there, declaring that she is a special informant for the FBI. In fact, this screwball reported my wife, Paula Mae Martin, as being a communist just because my wife picks up my mail at our post office box every day and brings it home. Because of the fact that a part of this correspondence comes from outside the U.S., like Canada, England, France, Rome, etc., this bullshit nearly caused my wife to lose her job, inasmuch as an amateurish Keystone Cop Mutt and Jeff question and answer session followed. Furthermore, I had qualified as a candidate for the offices, both positions of the member of the Democratic State Central Committee as well as for member Orleans Parish Democratic Executive Committee to be brought to vote during the December 7th Democratic primary election here in Louisiana. However, because of this bullshit, or primarily because of this so-called big investigation and the stinking talk it has caused in political circles, I have had to withdraw from the election. I would like to know, since when has our government agency, the FBI, became the Bureau of Inquisition? Well, Dick, I am certain that you know much better of this, as do I. Although both my wife and I suffered needlessly over this, and as well known as I am, I feel that such a thing should have been discarded as nonsense at once, which it was not. Hence, it is that there should be a good old head rolling, and some should come off from top staff echelon, in this case, the office of J. Edgar Hoover. Will you put in a word on this for me and have this matter cleared at once? Because if they won't do it themselves, I'm going to be forced to have the federal courts take action on it, to clear the air, as it were, because of the gravity of its nature, to say nothing of the damages involved. Secondly, in reference to Ferry, don't your case records on Ferry show that this guy Oswald was a member of Ferry's so-called phony Cap Squadron? Remember all those large group pictures? Wasn't his picture in these? Perhaps you will also remember Ferry had a bunch of these foreign rifles that he used to train his, quote, cadets with. Furthermore, I understand that Ferry has been getting mail from these Cuban people Oswald was connected with. At least this is what W. Hardy Davis tells me. He says that G. Ray Gill raised hell with Ferry over having this type of propaganda at his office. We might also take it into consideration that Ferry was a professional hypnotist, that he used post-hypnotic suggestion on his so-called cadets, and also in the private practice of psychology here, when he advertised himself as a, quote, Ph.D. Moreover, suffice it to say, I am also told that Ferry had been in and out of town on several occasions just prior to this Kennedy business. Where was he? Well, he was in Texas, Jack. We might also remember Ferry's connection with the Cubans, and that these people dumped him because of his certain pro-Castro activities. Also, about Ferry's Cuban airplane flights, and the time he loaned his plane to Cubans. If you remember correctly, Sergio Arcacha of the Front dropped Ferry after this. And Carlos Quiroga of that group of anti-Castro people always referred to Ferry as no good, a red, etc. At least Ferry could have taught this subject Oswald how to use a weapon, and he could have also told his person just how to acquire a gun, its simplicity of purchase, etc. Furthermore, was not this the person, Oswald, that Ferry helped to get into the Marine Corps? As you know, Ferry is the kind of person who could have planned such a thing as this, and he is very capable of such a terrible thing. Dick, at least these facts bear investigation, and I hope this reminder may lend some small part to uncovering the dastardly facts behind what has happened. Thank you in advance. I remain respectfully your friend, sincerely Jack. P.S. Let's hear from you about this business regarding my wife if you have the time, and let me know if I can get you any additional info or do you any favor in the future. So, yeah. Very interesting stuff. Jack Martin is firing off 3 days after the assassination. I mean, he knew about the photographs of the Cap Squadron, and he called it phony. Very interesting stuff. So, here are some excerpts from the Orleans Parish Grand Jury Proceedings of June 28th, 1967, concerning witness Eugene C. Davis. Have you ever used Dean Andrews to parole or get anyone out of jail for homosexuality charges? He says, if I did, I didn't know about it. I won't say for sure because I'm not positive, but I don't think I ever did. Now that is a hell of a convoluted answer. I think you would know if you used a certain attorney to help out your gay buddies. But that's just me. To your knowledge, you have never had any relationship where you called Dean Andrews to recommend him for the arrests of homosexuals. I don't remember, but I don't believe I ever did. I won't say for sure. Again, very vague answer. Have you ever used the name Clay Bertrand? Never in my life, no sir. You have never told anyone that you are Clay or Clem Bertrand? He says, no, never. You have never used that name, either of them? He says, no sir, never. Did you know Lee Harvey Oswald? No sir, I do not. He says, but later he was asked about an anonymous call received by Garrison that Oswald used to hang out in Wanda's bar and that Gene Davis would know about this. Davis still denied knowing Oswald. If there's anything, gentlemen, that I knew that could help this man in his investigation, I'd be the first one to tell him. Believe me, I would. Members of his staff will tell you it's on record. They have come to me many times and I've cooperated with them and helped in many ways. Garrison says this is true. And if I thought for a minute there was some little flaw in this case I could give them, I would be the first one to go to Mr. Garrison because I don't think he has ever hurt me as I know of, and I don't think he ever will. Now Garrison asked him, do you know Clay Shaw? Do I know him? I know him very well. I lived across the street from him at 512 516 Dauphine. The house where the old lady I take care of right across the street is 509, and him and two old ladies used to get in and out of the car during the years he lived there. Now, as far as seeing anything at night, I could not say because I was gone all night working. Worked all them years as night manager of the Court of Two Sisters, and I wasn't home. I couldn't say, but I did see him in the daytime when I would have occasion to go see about this old woman I take care of. I would see him and two elderly women get in a long black car. I didn't know his name then. I didn't know he was Clay Shaw. More questions about the car, but Shaw didn't live at this house in 63. This is what inserted by Garrison. You say you have come to know Clay Shaw better since his indictment. What do you mean by that? He said, no, I said I know him through the papers. That is the only way I know him. I've never spoke one word to Clay Shaw in my life. Then a juror asks, have you heard the name Clay Bertrand used ever, or Clem Bertrand? That comes out in the paper. If they are sitting there, they discuss it in that way. People I don't even know who they are. But before that, I never in my life hear that name. I didn't know there was such a person living before that, and I still don't believe there's such a person. Eugene C. Davis, a French Quarter bar owner, was called to the stand at 2:50 p.m. as a state rebuttal witness. Alcock asked Davis, have you ever heard of a person named Clay Bertrand? Davis replied, not until this investigation. When asked if he ever called Dean Andrews and used the name Clay Bertrand, Davis said no. Who is the credible witness? William Morris, who Garrison cites in his book, or Gene Davis, who Garrison's office put on the witness stand at Dean Andrews and Clay Shaw's trials? According to Bill Davey, Morris's statement dated July 1267, over a month before Davis's appearance at the Andrews perjury trial. Morris says Davis introduced him to Clay Bertrand. Davis said he had never heard of anyone by the name before the Garrison investigation. Davis also said he had never spoken to Clay Shaw in his life. Davis not only contradicts Morris's story, he refutes Garrison's claim that this was common knowledge that Shaw uses the name Bertrand. As a French Quarter bar owner, Davis was in a position to know, yet Garrison's office presented this man to two juries as a witness. Now, of course, Gene Davis came to light as the man who Dean Andrews claimed he was protecting with the alias Clay Bertrand might have known Lee Harvey Oswald because Davis was arrested in 1958 along with other men accused of molesting boys aged 15 to 16. Oswald lived in New Orleans from 54 to 56, and his age was between 14 and 16 at the time. And given the circumstances of his life, he might have been vulnerable to such an approach. The following are the articles about the 58 incident, and I don't know the exact disposition of the charges, but at the Shaw trial in 69, Davis testified he had never been convicted of any crime. So Davis had been charged with obscenity by possessing lewd photographs. His bond was recommended at $1,500. The others were charged with committing crimes against nature. Charged were Eugene Davis, 522 Dauphine. Davis's bond was set at $2,500. The others' bonds were set at $1,500. He was arrested in connection with the investigation of adults picking up 15 to 16-year-old boys and was accused of taking nude photographs of the boys. Police Juvenile Bureau officers said about 100 nude and pornographic pictures were confiscated at his apartment. On October 21st, 1958, arrest followed quizzing of runaway boy. Officers arrested and confiscated numerous nude photographs of white and Negro juvenile boys. About 30 juveniles were identified from the photographs. Police said these juvenile boys were contacted and interrogated, and many of them made written statements. The investigation showed that this was not a ring. Police added that the juveniles were receiving money for participating in sex acts and posing for the photographs, which were supposed to be sold to magazines. The juveniles were picked up by many of the accused adults in the French Quarter amusement locations and at a swimming area by the Mississippi River near Audubon Park. Police said all except and were charged in criminal district court. Charges of obscenity were filed against Eugene Davis, while crime against nature charges were filed against the others. Diamond asked Davis at the Shaw trial if he had ever been convicted of a crime. Never, he said. He then told Diamond he has lived in New Orleans about 18 to 20 years, has known Andrews for about 10 to 12. On June the 1st, 1984, a French Quarter bar owner was found bludgeoned to death Thursday, May 31st, in the bedroom of his apartment. The victim was identified as Eugene Davis, 58 of 522 Dauphine Street, owner of Gregory's Lounge at 439 Dauphine. Davis's body was discovered at about 10 a.m. by a workman who was repairing the house. The death was unclassified until an autopsy later Thursday revealed Davis was beaten on the head several times with a blunt object. Funeral services for Mr. Eugene Davis will be held at 11 a.m. Monday the 4th after he was found dead Thursday morning in his home, apparently beaten to death, according to the police. Mr. Davis was a native of Pennsylvania and a resident of New Orleans for 28 years. At the Shaw trial in 69, he said he had been living in New Orleans for 18 to 20. He was a French Quarter merchant and owned and operated Gregory's Lounge and was a member of Number 35 Moose Lodge and the Celestial Knights. So, it appears in 1984, Mr. Eugene Davis was murdered. Very interesting. Well, that's it, folks, for the Holiday Potpourri Show. I hope you enjoyed it, and I promise I'll be back soon with more The Lone Gunman Podcast and more quick hits with my buddy Doug Campbell. In the meantime, head to the archives and hit them up. There's a gazillion shows in there. Like, comment, subscribe, and feel free to email the show at thelonegunmanpodcast@gmail.com. You can email Quick Hits at quickhitsjfk@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, and have a great New Year. Out.